In the sweltering heat of a Texas summer, one man's arrogance ignites a fire that will consume an airline. At Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, a decorated pilot's prejudice doesn't just offend a passenger, it triggers a chain reaction that unravels his career, his company, and a hidden web of negligence. This is the story of a single snap judgment in a crowded terminal becoming a reckoning for an entire industry. The air in Terminal C of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport was a thick, humid pulse of controlled chaos on that blistering July morning in 2026. The terminal hummed with the symphony of modern travel, the rhythmic clatter of rolling luggage, the tinny drone of gate announcements, and the low murmur of 1,000 conversations weaving together into a tapestry of impatience and purpose. For Dr. Amara Brooks, it was just another Tuesday. At 32, she had spent nearly a decade navigating airports like this one, sterile conduits to her real work, ensuring the skies remained safe. She stood patiently in the priority boarding line for HorizonStar Airlines Flight 214 to Seattle, her dark eyes scanning an email on her phone. The line, marked by a sleek black velvet rope, was reserved for first-class passengers and HorizonStar's Diamond Elite members, a small oasis of privilege amidst the growing crowd of general boarding passengers. Amara, dressed in what she considered her travel uniform, a tailored linen blazer, dark jeans, practical yet stylish ankle boots, and a cream silk blouse, blended modern professionalism with comfort. Her hair styled in neat cornrows that fell just past her shoulders, caught the fluorescent light as she shifted her weight. Her leather satchel slung over one arm, a trench coat neatly folded over the other. To the casual observer, she might have been a young professional, perhaps a consultant or a tech entrepreneur. Her youthful appearance and casual elegance at odds with the typical priority lane demographic. Middle-aged men in crisp suits, their faces etched with the weary self-importance of frequent business travel. Amara was replying to a colleague about a recent audit when a shadow fell over her, abrupt and imposing. She looked up, her fingers pausing on her phone, to find a man in a pilot's uniform standing directly in her path, his broad frame blocking her view of the gate agent's counter. His navy blue jacket was immaculate, the gold stripes on his epaulettes gleaming with authority, his name tag reading Captain Daniel Whitaker. He was in his early 50s, handsome in a weathered, authoritative way, with sharp green eyes, a square jaw, and salt and pepper hair cropped close. But those eyes, narrowed now, weren't looking at her boarding pass or her satchel. They were auditing her cornrows, her jeans, her boots, her very presence in this line. His gaze was a cold, calculating sweep, and when he spoke, his voice carried the deep, practiced cadence of cockpit announcements, laced with a condescension that stung more than anger ever could. "I think you're in the wrong line, miss," he said. The word miss dripping with patronizing patience, as if he were explaining a simple concept to a child. He gestured with a dismissive flick of his wrist toward the chaotic snake of general boarding passengers. "This is priority boarding. First class, Diamond Elite. The main line's back there." Amara lowered her phone, her expression calm, but her eyes sharp as she took his measure. She'd encountered men like Whitaker before, men who saw her and made assumptions, their biases as automatic as breathing. She offered a small, polite smile, one she'd perfected over years of navigating such encounters. "I'm aware," she said evenly, holding up her phone to display her boarding pass. The blocky text clearly showing her name, Dr. Amara Brooks, Seat 2A, and the coveted Group 1 designation. My boarding pass says I'm in the right place. Whitaker didn't even glance at the screen. It was as if the evidence was irrelevant, an inconvenience to the verdict he'd already rendered in his mind. He sighed, a heavy, theatrical sound, as if burdened by her ignorance. "Look," he said, his tone sharpening. "Sometimes the app glitches. It happens. But this line is for our most valued customers, and we need to keep it clear. So, if you could just step aside." He made a shooing motion with his hand, a gesture so arrogant it stole the breath from the air around them. Behind the counter, the gate agent, a young woman named Leela Carter, watched with wide, nervous eyes. Her name tag gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and her fingers hovered over her keyboard, frozen by the unfolding scene. Leela knew protocol. Gate agents handled ticketing and boarding, not confrontations with senior captains. But a knot of unease tightened in her stomach as she saw the calm, composed woman before Whitaker, her dignity unshaken despite his words. The other passengers in the priority line shifted uncomfortably. A few men in suits averted their eyes, suddenly engrossed in their phones or the departure board overhead. Others watched with a flicker of amusement, eager for a bit of pre-flight drama to break the monotony. No one spoke up. Amara's smile didn't waver, but a cold fury began to coil in her chest. A controlled burn she'd learned to harness long ago. "There's no glitch, Captain," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the heat building within her. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Whitaker's eyes narrowed further, his lips curling into a smirk. "Is that so?" he said, his tone now openly mocking. Before Amara could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Dan, what's the hold-up?" A younger man in a pilot's uniform emerged from the jet bridge entrance, his name tag reading First Officer Ryan Patel. He was in his late 30s, with a friendlier face and dark eyes that darted between Whitaker and Amara, sensing the brewing storm. Whitaker didn't turn, his gaze locked on Amara. "Just clearing up some confusion," he said, his smirk growing. "This young lady seems to think her outfit and that hairstyle qualify her for Diamond Elite status." The words landed like a slap, heavy and ugly. The air in the terminal seemed to thicken, the hum of background noise fading as the confrontation took center stage. Whitaker had crossed a line, making it personal, reducing Amara to her appearance, her race, her perceived place in his world. Leela Carter, still behind the counter, flinched, her hand twitching toward the phone as if to call for help, but unsure if she should. "Captain," she said, her voice a nervous squeak, "I can scan her pass right here. We can clear this up." Whitaker shot Leela a withering glare, a look that said, "Stay out of this. I'm handling it, Leela," he snapped. "I'll let you know when I need you to do your job." He turned back to Amara, his posture stiffening, his voice dropping to a low, menacing edge. "Last chance, miss. Step out of the line, or I'll have security escort you." The threat hung in the air, a public humiliation that drew gasps from a few passengers. Amara felt the weight of every eye in the vicinity, pity, contempt, curiosity, cowardice. The fire in her chest flared, but she kept it leashed, her years of training and discipline holding her steady. This man, this Captain Daniel Whitaker, of HorizonStar Airlines, had no idea who he was dealing with. He had no concept of the power she wielded, a power she rarely invoked but which now stirred like a waking giant. She let the silence stretch, meeting his icy green eyes with her unyielding gaze. Then she spoke, her voice low, dangerously calm, a hint of steel cutting through. "No, Captain," she said. "I don't think you will." The standoff was absolute, the space between them crackling with tension that seemed to suck the oxygen. From the terminal, Whitaker's face, moments ago a mask of smug authority, flickered with surprise. He was a man accustomed to unquestioned obedience from his first officer in the cockpit to the cabin crew who snapped to attention at his word. The idea that this woman, whom he'd dismissed as an interloper, would not only refuse but challenge him was a glitch in his worldview. "What did you just say to me?" he asked, his voice losing its condescending softness and taking on a harder edge. Amara didn't raise her voice. She tilted her head slightly, a gesture of mild curiosity that was somehow more unnerving than defiance. "I said, no, you won't be calling security, and you will be stepping aside so the gate agent can scan my boarding pass, and I can board this flight." She held up her phone again, not as a plea, but as a statement of fact, the screen glowing with her credentials. Ryan Patel shifted his weight, his discomfort palpable. "Dan, maybe we should just let her scan the pass," he said, his voice tentative. "We're gonna be late pushing back." Whitaker ignored him, his focus locked on Amara. He saw her composure not as strength, but as insolence, a challenge to his authority. "You have a real attitude problem, you know that," he sneered. "Who do you think you are?" It was the question she'd been waiting for, the opening she needed. A small knowing smile touched her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes, which were all business, sharp and unyielding. "You should be more concerned with who you are." "Captain Whitaker," she said, her voice a low, clinical dissection of his failure. "You're the pilot in command of HorizonStar Flight 2014, a position that demands sound judgment, the ability to assess a situation, analyze the data presented, and make a rational decision." She took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance between them, forcing him to take an involuntary step back, a tiny retreat that shifted the balance of power in a way everyone watching could feel. "The data presented to you was a valid boarding pass. The situation was a passenger standing in the correct line. Your assessment was to profile, to condescend, and ultimately to threaten. That calls into question, quite dramatically, your fitness to command." The words landed like a surgical strike, precise and devastating. The priority line, once a restless cluster of onlookers, fell silent. Passengers exchanged wide-eyed glances, the air thick with the weight of her words. Whitaker's face flushed a mottled red, his jaw clenching as he absorbed the public dismantling. He was being lectured on judgment by a woman he'd mentally categorized as an affirmative action case, an upstart who didn't belong. The humiliation was a physical thing, hot and suffocating. "That's it," he snarled, turning to Lila. "Call security now. This woman is a disruptive passenger. I want her removed." Leela Carter looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming truck. Her hand hovered over the phone, trembling, her eyes darting between Whitaker's imposing figure and Amara's unshaken calm. Protocol demanded she obey a senior captain, but every instinct screamed that this was wrong. Amara hadn't raised her voice, hadn't threatened anyone, hadn't done a single thing to warrant being labeled disruptive. The only disruption was Whitaker himself. Amara caught Leela's distress and gave her a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a silent signal to hold off. Then she turned back to Whitaker, her voice steady and laced with a quiet menace. "That's an interesting choice, Captain," she said. "A disruptive passenger charge is a serious accusation. It will generate a great deal of paperwork, ports, statements from you, from me, from your first officer, from this gate agent, and from every passenger who witnessed this exchange. She gestured vaguely to the line behind her, where phones were already out, recording the scene. It will all be documented. Your words, my words, your refusal to look at my credentials, your comments about my hair, everything. Are you certain you want to create that permanent record, Captain? Are you willing to stake your career on the assumption that you're right and I'm wrong? Her words were a slow-acting poison, seeping into the certainty that had defined Daniel Whittaker's world. For the first time, a sliver of doubt pierced his armor of arrogance. He looked past her at the passengers, their expressions no longer amused but appraising, judging him. He glanced at Ryan Patel, whose face was a mask of alarm, silently pleading for him to back down. He looked at Leela, still frozen, her hand hovering over the phone. The entire scene was a tableau of his own making, spiraling out of his control. He still had the power to follow through, to force the issue, to have her dragged away. But her question echoed in his mind. Are you certain? Faced with her unshakable confidence, Captain Daniel Whittaker, for the first time that day, was not just scan her pass, he mumbled, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He didn't say it to Amara, but to Lila, avoiding eye contact with anyone. He turned abruptly and stalked down the jet bridge, his shoulders stiff with fury and wounded pride. Ryan Patel gave Amara a quick, apologetic nod before hurrying after his captain. A collective sigh rippled through the boarding area, the tension breaking like a snapped cable. Lila, looking immensely relieved, gave Amara a grateful smile. I'm so sorry about that, she whispered as she took Amara's phone. The scanner beeped its cheerful green confirmation. There you go, Dr. Brooks. Welcome aboard. Amara's smile finally reached her eyes, but it carried a weary sadness. Thank you, Lila, she said softly, picking up her trench coat and satchel. She walked toward the jet bridge, her boots clicking rhythmically on the tiled floor. The passengers parted for her, their eyes filled with a mix of respect and burning curiosity. They didn't know who she was, but they knew she was not someone to be trifled with. As she stepped into the enclosed walkway, leaving the terminal behind, Amara knew this incident was far from over. It was just the beginning. Inside the cockpit of Flight 214, the atmosphere was glacial. First Officer Ryan Patel sat in the right-hand seat, running through the pre-flight checklist with a clipped, professional monotone. APU on, bleeds on, fuel pumps, he said, his eyes fixed on the instruments. Captain Daniel Whittaker didn't respond. He stared out the cockpit window at the ground crew, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched in his cheek. He'd been humiliated publicly, forced to back down, and in his mind, that was a failure more stinging than any mechanical issue or weather delay. He replayed the scene in his head, her calm, analytical voice slicing through his authority like a blade. Dr. Brooks, she'd called herself. He scoffed inwardly, probably some overeducated academic with a useless degree and an inflated sense of entitlement. Seatbelt sign on anti-ice, Patel prompted, pausing the checklist. Dan, are you with me? Whittaker grunted. Checklist complete, he said, reaching for the radio. Ground, HorizonStar 214, ready to push. His voice was tight, barely masking his rage. As the plane began its slow pushback from the gates, Amara walked down the aisle to her seat, 2A, in the first-class cabin. She felt the stairs quick, curious glances from passengers who'd witnessed the drama and whispered exchanges from those who hadn't. She ignored them, stowing her satchel under the seat and her trench coat in the overhead bin, settling into The plush leather, she pulled out her phone, not to scroll social media, but to send a single encrypted message to her FAA superior, Regional Administrator Elena Baskis. The message was concise. Asterisk Dr. Brooks, initiating unannounced level for inspection. HorizonStar, DFW ramp, aircraft, and crew. Begin with flight 214 to C. I am on board. Incident with Pick Whitaker, Daniel. Details to follow. The reply came almost instantly. Vasquez, confirmed. Team en route from the field office. Full operational support authorized. Be safe. Asterisk. Amara slipped her phone into her pocket, the die-cast. A level 4 inspection was no routine. Check it was a comprehensive audit of an airline's operations at a specific location, triggered by significant incidents or credible evidence of systemic safety failures. As the FAA's lead safety inspector for the Southwest region, Amara had the authority to initiate one at her discretion, a power she used sparingly. Today, Captain Whitaker's behavior had been the spark. It wasn't just his prejudice or rudeness, though those were galling enough. It was the catastrophic failure of judgment they represented. If he could be so irrational over a boarding line, how would he handle a high-stakes emergency at 30,000 feet? What other corners was he, and by extension, HorizonStar Airlines cutting? His attitude wasn't just a character flaw, it was a safety hazard. Meanwhile, in HorizonStar's DFW operations office, a different storm was brewing. Jameson Holt, the vice president of operations for the region, was mid-briefing when his assistant, Marissa, burst in, her face pale. "Mr. Holt, you need to see this," she said, handing him a tablet. On the screen was an official FAA notification. Stark and alarming. The immediate commencement of a Level 4 inspection of all HorizonStar operations at DFW. Holt felt a cold dread wash over him. This was a nightmare scenario: cancelled flights, massive delays, federal agents swarming every corner of his operation, from maintenance hangars to crew lounges. It meant millions in lost revenue and a potential PR catastrophe. What the hell triggered this? He demanded, scrolling through the document for a cause. The notification was vague, citing only the FAA's broad authority. No incidents, no runway incursions, no major mechanicals, nothing. His phone buzzed. It was the tower chief, Greg Larson. "Jameson," Larson said, his voice grim. "You've got a problem on 214. The FAA just revoked their takeoff clearance. They're ordering them back to the gate." "What problem?" Holt snapped. "They've already pushed back." "Not anymore," Larson replied. "And there's more. An FAA inspection team just arrived at the airport, heading for your gate. They're led by Elena Vasquez's top inspector." Holt's blood ran cold. Vasquez's top inspector was a legend in the industry, known as the enforcer for her ruthless thoroughness and incorruptible standards. No one had a clear photo of her, but her reputation was a specter that haunted airline executives. "Who is it?" Holt asked, his voice barely a whisper. There was a pause. "Her name's Brooks. Dr. Amara Brooks." The name hit Holt like a punch. He'd seen the preliminary passenger manifest for Flight 214. Dr. Amara Brooks, Seat 2A flagged as a government employee for courtesy purposes. A young woman, the gate agent's notes had said. It clicked into place with horrifying clarity. He pulled up the gate's CCTV footage on his computer, his fingers trembling. He fast-forwarded to the boarding time for Flight 214 and watched in abject horror as the scene unfolded. Captain Daniel Whitaker, chest puffed out, blocking a young black woman, his voice dripping with condescension, sneering about her hair. threatening security. And her calm, unshaken, her quiet defiance now looked less like attitude and more like the coiled patience of ultimate authority. "Oh, Dan," Holt whispered, burying his face in his hands. "What have you done?" On board the aircraft, passengers murmured in confusion as the plane, which had been taxiing toward the runway, made a slow, deliberate turn back toward the gates. An announcement crackled over the intercom, but it wasn't Whitaker's voice. It was Ryan Patel, his tone strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a slight delay this morning. We're being asked to return to the gate due to an unforeseen ground issue. We apologize for the inconvenience and will provide more information soon." Amara watched out her window as the jet bridge came back into view. On the tarmac, just outside the terminal door, stood a group of figures in dark blue jackets, FAA, emblazoned in bold yellow letters on their backs. Her team had arrived. Whitaker's voice finally came over the intercom, tight with barely suppressed rage. "Folks, this is your captain. Are there some sort of administrative review we need to handle? We should be on our way shortly." But the cabin door opened, and Lila Carter stood there, her face ashen. Behind her was Jameson Holt, looking like he might be physically ill. And behind him, the FAA team, led by Tara, Nguyen Amara's deputy, a sharp-eyed woman with a tablet already in hand. Holt walked into the first-class cabin, his steps heavy, his eyes scanning until they landed on Amara in seat 2A. He stopped beside her, his voice a mix of terror and deference. "Dr. Brooks," he said, loud enough for the cabin to hear, "I'm Jameson Holt, VP of Operations. I had no idea. We had no idea." Amara looked up at him, her expression neutral, her voice clear and carrying through the silent cabin. "That's the problem, Mr. Holt," she said. "You had no idea. And your pilot, responsible for the lives of 180 souls on this aircraft, decided to substitute his judgment for procedure. So now my team and I are here to find out what else you and your airline have no idea about." She stood, her small frame, commanding the space. "This aircraft is now grounded. This is an active investigation site. My team will start with the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder. Please have Captain Whitaker and First Officer Patel come to the jet bridge. I'd like a word with them before we review their credentials and flight logs." The passengers watched, mouths agape. The woman who'd been denied her place in line was now taking over the entire plane. In the cockpit, Whitaker heard her voice over the open intercom, and the blood drained from his face. Dr. Amara Brooks, the FAA inspector, the woman he'd insulted and threatened. It was in that moment that Captain Daniel Whitaker understood. His flight wasn't just delayed. His career was in freefall. The jet bridge of Gate C-22 became an impromptu nerve center for the FAA's surgical takeover. Whitaker and Patel stood side by side, their uniforms feeling less like symbols of authority and more like costumes in a trial. Whitaker's face was a stony mask of disbelief, while Patel looked pale, his eyes darting nervously. Amara stood. Before them, her trench coat back on, her satchel open on the gate agent's counter, a government-issue tablet in her hands. Tara Nguyen flanked her, already pulling data from HorizonStar systems, while another team member, a grizzled avionics expert named Frank Delgado, prepared to board the plane. The rest of the FAA team had fanned out two to the maintenance logs office, two to inspect ground crew procedures, and two to examine the Airbus A321's landing gear and engines. "Captain Whitaker," Amara began, her tone devoid of emotion. I'm Dr. Amara Brooks, Lead Safety Inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration. Under Title 49 of the United States Code, my team is conducting a full-spectrum safety and compliance audit of HorizonStar's DFW operations. This audit was triggered by a direct observation of a serious lapse in command judgment. Whitaker flinched as if struck. It was a misunderstanding in the boarding line, he sputtered. A simple mistake. There was no misunderstanding, Amara countered, her gaze unwavering. You were presented with a valid boarding pass. You chose to ignore it in favor of personal bias. You escalated by refusing verification procedures and issued a threat. To involve security, the cockpit is no place for bias or ego. It's a place for procedure and fact. You demonstrated a shocking inability to adhere to either. She turned to Patel. Mr. Patel, you were present. Did you advise the captain to de-escalate and follow procedure? Patel swallowed hard, feeling Whitaker's glare. I suggested. We scanned the pass, he said, voice barely audible, to save time. A commendable, if timid, suggestion, Amara noted, typing on her tablet. She turned back to Whitaker. Your flight credentials, pilot's license, and medical certificate. Now, please. With stiff movements, Whitaker produced his wallet and handed over the documents. Amara passed them to Tara, who began cross-referencing them against federal databases. Frank, Amara said, start with the CVR and FDR. I want the full recording from their last departure to now. Cross-reference, engine performance, and control inputs. Frank nodded and disappeared into the plane. The cockpit voice recorder would capture every word spoken. The flight data recorder would log every action. They were the aircraft's unblinking witnesses. Now, Captain Whitaker, Amara continued, let's discuss your logbook. The last 90 days flight hours, rest periods. A flicker of panic crossed Whitaker's eyes. They're in order, he said, his voice tight. Everything's by the book. We'll be the judge of that, Amara said coolly. My team is pulling your records from HorizonStar and the FAA database. I trust they'll match your logbook. Whitaker's face went ghostly white. It was a known secret among some pilots fudging logbooks, shaving rest periods to maximize flight time and pay, a risky gamble against fatigue and regulations. Whitaker had played that game for years. Amara's tablet pinged with an incoming message from Tara. Dr. Brooks, Tara said. Her voice sharp. There's a flag on Captain Whitaker's medical certificate. It's valid, but there's a restriction requires corrective lenses for distance vision. Amara raised an eyebrow. Whitaker hadn't been wearing glasses during the confrontation or on the jet bridge. Captain, she asked, where are your glasses? In my flight bag, he said quickly. I only need them for specific things. Low visibility landings. The restriction doesn't say specific things, Tara interjected, reading from her tablet. It says must be worn while exercising the privileges of the license. That means from the moment you enter the cockpit. She looked at Patel, first officer. Has Captain Whitaker been wearing glasses during pre-flight or taxiing? Patel shook his head mutely, eyes on the floor. It was a small violation, but in aviation, there were no small violations, only regulations. Born from past tragedies. Whitaker's vanity had led him to ignore a critical safety requirement. Just then, an FAA agent from the ramp returned, holding a tablet with high-resolution photos. Dr. Brooks, you need to see this, he said. Tire number 4, left main. Gear, there's a bald spot down to the casing and a deep cut. Amara zoomed in on the image. The damage was severe, a potential blowout risk on takeoff or landing. "Was this logged in the pre-flight inspection?" she asked. "No, ma'am," the agent replied. "The log was signed off by Captain Whitaker. No issues noted." Amara turned her gaze back to Whitaker, who looked like a trapped animal. He'd either skipped the inspection or done it so carelessly he missed a glaring flaw. Both were unforgivable. "Mr. Holt," Amara called to the VP, who'd been watching with dread. "I'm grounding Captain Whitaker, effective immediately. He is not to operate any commercial aircraft pending a full FAA review. Have a security. Escort him off the premises. First Officer Patel, you'll remain for a debriefing." She addressed the grounded aircraft. "My team is just getting started. We'll review every maintenance log for this airframe for the last 12 months. Interview every mechanic, scrutinize crew scheduling, training records, and your safety culture. What started with your captain is now about your entire airline, Mr. Holt." As Whitaker was led away by security, his career in tatters, the terminal buzzed with whispers. Passenger videos of the confrontation were already spreading online. Hashtags like #HorizonStar Scandal gaining traction. Amara stood on the jet bridge, her team moving with precision around her, and knew this was only the beginning. The fire. Whitaker had ignited woodburn through HorizonStar, exposing every hidden flaw, and she, Dr. Amara Brooks, would ensure it burned clean. The jet bridge at Gate C-22 of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport was no longer just a passageway for travelers. It had transformed into the nerve center of a surgical operation, a stark fluorescent-lit stage where HorizonStar Airlines' carefully curated facade began to crumble. Dr. Amara Brooks stood at the heart of it, her trench coat draped over the gate agent's counter, her leather satchel open, revealing a government tissue tablet that glowed with the weight of authority. The air was thick with tension, the hum of the terminal muted by the gravity of what was unfolding. Captain Daniel Whitaker, now stripped of his command, had been escorted away by airport security, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, while First Officer Ryan Patel stood awkwardly to the side, his uniform feeling increasingly like a costume in a trial he hadn't signed up for. Amara's FAA team moved with relentless precision. 6 agents in dark blue jackets, emblazoned with FAA in bold yellow, dispersing to maintenance hangars, ground crew stations, and the grounded Airbus A321 itself. The investigation had begun, and it was no mere audit. It was a Level 4 inspection, a top-to-bottom dissection of HorizonStar's operations at DFW, triggered by Whitaker's catastrophic lapse in judgment. But Amara knew this was bigger than one man's prejudice. The confrontation in the priority line was a symptom, a crack in the surface that hinted at deeper rot. And she was here to expose it all. Tara Nguyen, Amara's deputy and a specialist in data analysis and compliance, stood beside her, her sharp eyes scanning a stream of data on her tablet. "Dr. Brooks," Tara said, her voice low but urgent. "We've got an anomaly already. The flight data recorder from Flight 214's last leg, Chicago to Dallas, shows irregularities in the engine performance logs. The system reported stable thrust, but there's a ghost signal, like someone manually overrode the diagnostic output." Amara's eyes narrowed. A tampered flight data system was no small matter. It suggested deliberate concealment, a cover-up, that could endanger lives. "Cross-reference it with the maintenance logs," she said, her tone clipped. "If someone's been cooking the books, we need to know who and why." Frank Delgado, The grizzled avionics expert emerged from the aircraft, his face grim. He held a portable diagnostic device, its screen displaying a series of graphs and error codes. "Dr. Brooks, you're gonna want to see this," he said, handing her the device. The cockpit voice recorder captured some interesting chatter from the last flight. Whitaker and Patel were discussing a recurring engine alert, but Whitaker dismissed it as a sensor glitch and told Patel to log it as resolved. No follow-up, no maintenance request. Amara's jaw tightened. Dismissing an engine alert without verification was reckless, a violation of protocol that could have catastrophic consequences. "Get me the full transcript," she said, "and pull the engine's maintenance history. If they've been flying with a known issue, we're looking at more than just one pilot's bad day." As Frank headed back to the plane, Amara turned to Ryan Patel, who looked like he was trying to shrink into the jet bridge wall. "Mr. Patel," she said, her voice calm but unyielding, "you were in the cockpit when Captain Whitaker dismissed that engine alert. Did you challenge him? Did you report it to dispatch or maintenance?" Patel's eyes darted to the floor, his hands clenching at his sides. "I told him we should log it for a full diagnostic," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But he said it was nothing, that it had happened before and wasn't worth delaying the flight. He's the pick, I didn't push it." Amara made a note on her tablet, her expression unreadable. "A timid suggestion isn't enough, Mr. Patel," she said. "You're a required crew member. Your responsibility is to safety, not to your captain's ego. We'll need a full statement from you, under whistleblower protection if necessary." Patel nodded, his face pale, but before Amara could press further, a new figure approached a mechanic in a grease-stained HorizonStar jumpsuit, his ID badge identifying him as Carlos Rivera. He was in his early 40s, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervous energy that seemed to radiate from him. "Dr. Brooks," he said, his voice low, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting to be overheard. "I need to talk to you. Somewhere private." Amara raised an eyebrow but nodded, gesturing to a small office just off the jet bridge, used for gate agent briefings. She signaled Tara to join them, and the three stepped inside, closing the door behind them. Inside the cramped office, Carlos's hands shook as he spoke. "I've been trying to report something for months," he said, his voice cracking. "Engine 2 on that A321, the one you grounded, has been throwing intermittent sensor faults for weeks. I logged it, recommended a full teardown, but my supervisor told me to sign it off as monitored. Said we couldn't afford the downtime. I didn't want to lose my job, so I did it. But it's not just that plane, it's a pattern. They push us to clear planes fast to keep the schedule. If you report too many issues, you're not a team player. You get sidelined, or worse." Amara exchanged a glance with Tara, who was already typing notes. "Mr. Rivera," Amara said, her tone gentle but firm, "you're doing the right thing now. We'll protect you under whistleblower statutes. I need everything: dates, logs, names of who pressured you. Can you do that?" Carlos nodded, pulling a USB drive from his pocket. "I've got copies of the logs, the ones they told me to alter. Emails, too, from my supervisor. It's all here." Amara took the drive, her mind racing. A whistleblower with hard evidence was a game changer. A key to unlocking the systemic failures she suspected ran deep in HorizonStar's operations. "Thank you, Carlos," she said. "Stay available. We'll need your testimony." As he left, his shoulders slightly less hunched, Amara handed the drive to Tara. Get this to the team. Start cross-referencing it with the official logs. If there's a cover-up, we're going to find it. Back on the jet bridge, the investigation was gaining momentum. 2 FAA agents had returned from the maintenance hangar, their faces grim. One held a tablet with photos of a hydraulic pump from the grounded A321, showing signs of wear that hadn't been logged. This pump was signed off as serviced last month, the agent said, but the wear patterns suggest it hasn't been touched in years. Someone's been pencil whipping these maintenance checks. Amara's stomach churned. Pencil whipping, signing off on inspections without performing them, was a cardinal sin in aviation. A shortcut that risked lives for the sake of the schedule. Pull the mechanic's records, she said, and get me the diagnostic data from the pump's last test. If it's been faked, we'll know. Meanwhile, in HorizonStar's DFW operations office, Jameson Holt was drowning in a crisis of his own making. The Level 4 inspection had thrown the airline's operations into chaos. Flight 214's cancellation was just the start. The FAA's presence meant every plane at DFW was under scrutiny, and delays were piling up across the network. Phone buzzed incessantly with calls from corporate, the tower, and irate passengers. But the real nightmare was unfolding online. The passenger video of Whitaker's confrontation with Amara had gone viral, racking up millions of views in hours. Hashtags like #HorizonStarScandal and #racist trended on social media, each post amplifying the outrage. A shaky clip of Whitaker sneering, "This young lady thinks her outfit and that hairstyle qualify her for Diamond Elite," was looped endlessly, dissected by commentators and meme accounts alike. To make matters worse, a rival airline had seized the opportunity, leaking internal HorizonStar emails to the press that hinted at a culture of cutting corners. The emails, though vague, fueled speculation that HorizonStar's on-time performance was built on a foundation of ignored safety protocols. Holt sat at his desk, his tie loosened, sweat beading on his forehead. He'd just hung up with the tower chief, who'd informed him that 3 more flights were being held at the gate pending FAA clearance. The financial bleeding was immediate: millions in lost revenue, passenger compensation, and overtime for scrambled crews. He pulled up his email, praying for some reprieve, but found a new message from HorizonStar's CEO, Richard Davenport. It was short and brutal. "Get this under control, Jameson. The board is watching. Your job is on the line." Holt slammed his laptop shut, his hands trembling. He knew who Dr. Amara Brooks was, now the FAA's enforcer, a legend whose inspections had grounded fleets and toppled executives. And he knew, with sickening certainty, that Whitaker's arrogance had handed her the match to burn HorizonStar to the ground. Back on the jet bridge, Amara's team was tearing through Horizon records with forensic precision. Tara had connected Carlos Rivera's USB drive to her tablet, and the data was a goldmine. Emails from a maintenance supervisor, identified as Tom Kessler, instructed mechanics to clear minor issues without full diagnostics to avoid delays. One email, dated 3 weeks prior, read, "We're under pressure to keep the fleet moving. If it's not a red flag, sign it off and move on. We'll handle it in the next cycle." Amara's blood ran cold. This wasn't just negligence. It was a deliberate policy of prioritizing profit over safety. She turned to Tara. "Get Kessler in here," she said. and pull every maintenance log he's signed off on for the last 6 months. We need to know how far this goes. As Tara coordinated with the team, Amara turned her attention back to Ryan Patel, who was still standing on the jet bridge, looking increasingly like a man who wished he could disappear. "Mr. Patel," she said, "let's talk about the culture. In that cockpit, how often does Captain Whitaker dismiss alerts or push you to ignore protocol?" Patel hesitated, his loyalty to his captain warring with the reality of the situation. "It's not uncommon," he admitted finally. Says he's flown through worse and knows what's serious. He doesn't like delays, and the company backs him up. They want the planes in the air." Amara nodded, making another note. Patel's testimony, under whistleblower protection, would be critical in proving a pattern of reckless behavior. The investigation was moving at breakneck speed, but Amara's mind drifted briefly to her history, the reason she stood here now, unyielding in her pursuit of truth. Her father, Captain Marcus Brooks, had been a pilot for a regional carrier, a man who loved the skies and lived by the book. 12 years ago, he'd died in a crash caused by a hydraulic failure that maintenance had monitored rather than repaired, a decision made to save time and money. Amara had been 20, a college student studying engineering, when the news came. The NTSB report had been her awakening, a brutal lesson in the cost of negligence. She'd switched her major to aviation safety, earned her doctorate, and joined the FAA, driven by a singular purpose: to ensure no one else paid the price her family had. Whitaker's arrogance, his dismissal of her, wasn't just personal, it was a reminder of the mindset that had killed her father. She pushed the memory aside, refocusing on the task at hand. Frank Delgado returned, his expression darker than before. "Dr. Brooks, we've got a problem," he said, holding up his diagnostic device. "The flight data recorder shows the engine alert wasn't just a sensor glitch. There's evidence of a fuel flow irregularity that's been occurring for at least 3 flights. Whitaker logged it as resolved each time, but there's no record of a diagnostic test." Amara's heart sank. A fuel flow issue could lead to engine failure, a mid-air catastrophe waiting to happen. "Get the engine team on it," she said, "and pull the fuel system logs. If they've been flying with this, we're looking at gross negligence." As the FAA team dug deeper, the terminal outside was descending into chaos. Passengers from Flight 214, now officially cancelled, were herded back to the ticket counter, their frustration boiling over. Cell phone videos of the confrontation continued to spread, with news outlets picking up the story. A local reporter, tipped off by the viral footage, was already at the airport, interviewing passengers. "It was unreal," one woman said, her voice trembling with indignation. "The pilot just assumed she didn't belong because of how she looked, and now we're all stuck here." The narrative was irresistible. An arrogant pilot's prejudice had grounded a flight, and the FAA was tearing HorizonStar apart. The airline's stock, which had opened strong that morning, began to slide as investors caught wind of the scandal. In the maintenance hangar, the FAA agents were relentless. They pulled logbooks going back a year, cross-referencing part serial numbers and mechanic certifications. Within hours, they found another discrepancy: a hydraulic pressure alert on the A321's left wing aileron, signed off as no fault found 3 times by the same mechanic, Tom Kessler. Frank Delgado, with his decades of experience, recognized the signs of pencil whipping. He pulled Kessler into a private office, his voice calm but unyielding. "Tom," he said, pointing to the log entries, "you signed off on this aileron 3 times. Where are the diagnostic printouts? They're supposed to be attached. Kessler, a wiry man in his 50s, sweated profusely. We were busy, he stammered. I ran the tests. They were clean. Frank stared at him, letting the silence stretch. Lying to a federal investigator is a felony, Tom, he said finally. We're pulling the diagnostic machines. Internal memory. It'll show every test it's run. Did you perform the tests, or did you sign it off to keep the plane in the air? Kessler broke, his hands shaking. It was pressure from above, he confessed. They wanted the planes moving. The aileron issue was intermittent, so I figured it could wait. I didn't want to get written up. His confession was another crack in HorizonStar's foundation, evidence of a culture that prioritized schedule over safety. Amara, back on the jet bridge, was piecing together the puzzle. Carlos Rivera's USB drive had revealed a pattern of falsified logs, and Kessler's confession confirmed it wasn't just one rogue mechanic. The maintenance division was under orders to clear planes quickly, even if it meant cutting corners. She called Tara over. Expand the audit, she said. Every mechanic who signed off on this airframe in the last year, every log, every part, every test, and get me the crew scheduling records. If they're pushing mechanics, they're likely pushing pilots, too. Tara nodded, her fingers flying across her tablet. Already on it, she said, and I've got something else. The engine's fuel flow issue. It's tied to a faulty sensor that was replaced 6 months ago with an uncertified part. The serial number doesn't match FAA-approved suppliers. Amara's eyes widened. Using uncertified parts was a violation that could ground an entire fleet. Trace it, she said. Find out who authorized the purchase and who installed it. This isn't just negligence anymore. It's potentially criminal. As Tara coordinated with the team, Amara's phone buzzed with a message from Elena Vasquez, *Media's picking up the story. Skypulse is fanning the flames, leaking more documents. Keep your focus. We've got your back. Amara frowned. Skypulse's involvement was a complication, a rival airline exploiting HorizonStar's crisis for competitive gain, but it didn't change her mission. She was here for safety, not corporate games. The investigation was now a full-blown siege. In the cockpit, the FAA team had retrieved the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder, and the transcripts were damning. Whitaker's dismissive attitude wasn't limited to the boarding line. He'd been cavalier about alerts, procedures, and even rest periods. The FDR showed he'd logged a flight 2 weeks ago with only 6 hours of rest, well below the mandated 10. Amara confronted Patel with the evidence. Did you know about the rest violations? She asked. Patel looked away, shame creeping into his voice. I suspected, he said. He'd push us to fly even when we were exhausted. Said it was part of the job. The company never questioned it. They needed the flights to run. Amara's mind flashed to her father again, to the crash that had taken him. Fatigue had been a factor, the NTSB report had noted, along with a maintenance oversight. She pushed the memory down, focusing on Patel. You're giving a full statement, she said. Everything you know about Whitaker's practices and the company's pressure. This ends now. Patel nodded, resigned. Under whistleblower protection, he began detailing a culture of rushing pre-flights, ignoring minor write-ups, and prioritizing on-time performance over safety. His words painted a picture of an airline teetering on the edge, held together by arrogance and shortcuts. Outside, the terminal was a powder keg. Passengers from cancelled flights crowded the ticket counters, demanding answers. The viral video had sparked a firestorm, with news vans arriving at DFW and reporters interviewing anyone who'd witnessed the confrontation. Social media was ablaze, with posts calling for boycotts of HorizonStar and demands for Whitaker's firing. Skypulse's leaked emails, hinting at a culture of negligence, were picked up by major outlets, and the headline was brutal. * pilots' prejudice grounds. Airline, FAA, uncovers systemic failures at HorizonStar. * The airline's stock plummeted, losing $100 million in market value by mid. Investors, smelling blood, began dumping shares, and analysts predicted a PR disaster that could take years to recover from. In the maintenance hangar, the FAA team found more evidence of malpractice. A second aircraft, a Boeing 737 scheduled for a later flight, had a hydraulic leak that had been monitored rather than repaired, signed off by yet another mechanic under Kessler's supervision. Frank Delgado pulled the mechanic aside, a young woman named Sarah Lopez, who broke down under questioning. "They told us to keep the planes flying," she said, tears streaming down her face. "If we reported too many issues, we'd get reassigned to night shifts or written up. I didn't know what else to do." Frank's expression softened, but his voice was firm. "You're doing the right thing now," he said. "We'll need your statement, and you'll be protected. But we need to know everything." Amara stood. In the operations office, now a makeshift command center for the FAA team, the walls were lined with charts and schedules, but her focus was on the data pouring in. Carlos Rivera's USB drive had revealed a network of falsified logs, and Tara's analysis confirmed the use of uncertified parts in at least 3 aircraft. The engine sensor issue on the A321 was just the tip of the iceberg. Similar sensors had been installed on other planes, all from a shady supplier linked to a cost-cutting initiative approved by HorizonStar's corporate office. Amara called Alina Vasquez, her voice steady but urgent. "We've got evidence of systemic falsification and uncertified parts," she said. "This isn't just DFWI's, a company-wide issue. I'm recommending we expand the audit to their entire fleet." Vasquez's voice was grim. "Do it. I'm sending additional teams to their hubs in Chicago and Atlanta. This is bigger than we thought." Amara hung up, her resolve hardening. HorizonStar wasn't just a poorly run airline. It was a ticking time bomb, and Whitaker's arrogance had lit the fuse. Back on the jet bridge, Jameson Holt approached Amara, his face haggard. "Dr. Brooks," he said, his voice pleading, "we're cooperating fully. Can we at least get some flights moving? The delays are killing us." Amara's eyes were cold. "Mr. Holt," she said, "your airline has been flying planes with faulty sensors, falsified logs, and exhausted pilots. The only thing being killed here is your company's reputation, and that's on you. My team will decide when it's safe to fly again." Holt opened his mouth to protest, but the words died under her gaze. He turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped, knowing he was powerless. As the day wore on, the FAA team's findings piled up. A third aircraft showed signs of improper tire maintenance, with wear patterns suggesting imminent failure. Crew scheduling records revealed pilots routinely flying with minimal rest, encouraged by bonuses for meeting on-time targets. Training logs were incomplete, with some mechanics uncertified for the systems they serviced. The culture of fear Carlos Rivera had described was evident in every interview, with employees admitting they'd been pressured to prioritize speed over safety. Amara's tablet buzzed with updates from her team, each one a new nail in HorizonStar's coffin. Whitaker, now in a holding area with airport security, was a shadow of the man who'd strutted through the terminal hours earlier. His phone was silent, his colleagues avoiding him, his union representative already distancing itself. The FAA's evidence, his falsified logs, the missed tire check, the glasses violation, and the damning cockpit voice recorder was overwhelming. He replayed the confrontation in his mind, her calm voice cutting through his authority. Asterisk, are you willing to stake your career on the assumption that you're right and I'm wrong? He hadn't been certain then, and now he was certain of only one thing. His career was over. Amara, standing in the operations office, reviewed the latest findings with terror. The tampered flight data system was the most alarming discovery yet. The ghost signal Terra had flagged suggested someone had manipulated the software to hide engine issues, a deliberate act that required access to the aircraft's systems. "We need to trace the override," Amara said. "Find out who had the access and the motive." This wasn't an accident. Terra nodded, pulling up a list of maintenance personnel with system access. "I'm betting it's someone high up," she said. "This kind of tampering doesn't happen without approval." As the sun set over DFW, casting long shadows across the tarmac, the investigation showed no signs of slowing. The FAA team worked through the night, their laptops glowing in the operations office, their voices a low hum of determination. Amara stood by the window, watching planes sit idle at their gates, their HorizonStar logos gleaming under the floodlights. The airline was bleeding, its reputation in tatters, its future uncertain. But for Amara, this wasn't about vengeance. It was about safety, about preventing the kind of tragedy that had taken her father. She thought of Carlos Rivera risking his job to come forward, and Ryan Patel finally speaking the truth. They were the cracks in the system, the ones who could help her rebuild it stronger. The chapter closed with a call from Elena Vasquez, her voice urgent. "Amara, we've got a lead on the uncertified parts. It's tied to a corporate VP, someone in procurement. And Skypools just leaked another batch of emails claiming HorizonStar knew about the parts for months. The board's panicking, they're calling an emergency meeting tomorrow. You're expected to present." Amara nodded, her eyes fixed on the grounded planes. "I'll be there," she said, "and I'm bringing the truth." The line went dead, and Amara turned back to her team, her voice steady. "We're not done yet," she said. "This started with one pilot, but it's about the whole airline now. Let's find out how deep the rot goes." The FAA team nodded, their resolve matching hers. As the investigation plunged deeper into the heart of HorizonStar's failures, setting the stage for a reckoning that would shake the industry to its core. The boardroom at HorizonStar Airlines corporate headquarters in Dallas was a monument to corporate ambition, its walls lined with sleek mahogany panels and floor-to-ceiling, windows offering a commanding view of the city skyline. On this sweltering morning in August 2026, however, the opulent space felt more like a mausoleum, heavy with the weight of impending doom. The long polished table was flanked by HorizonStar's executive team, their faces pale and drawn, suits impeccably pressed but eyes betraying sleepless nights. At the head of the table sat Richard Davenport, the CEO, a man whose usual charisma had been replaced by a haggard exhaustion. His tie slightly askew, his hands gripping a coffee mug as if it were a lifeline. Opposite him, at the far end, sat Dr. Amara Brooks, her posture straight, her dark eyes unyielding. flanked by her FAA regional administrator, Elena Vasquez, and 2 FAA legal counsels, their expressions as impassive as stone. Between them lay a single bound document, several inches thick, its cover stark and unadorned except for the FAA seal and the words, "Level for Safety and Compliance Audit, HorizonStar Airlines, DFW Operations." It was a corporate death sentence, and every person in the room knew it. The report detailed a litany of failures, falsified maintenance logs, uncertified parts, crew fatigue, a tampered flight data system, and a culture of negligence that had festered under the guise of efficiency. For 3 weeks, Amara's team had torn through HorizonStar's operations at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, exposing a rot that reached from the tarmac to the boardroom. Today, in this room, the reckoning would be delivered. The fallout from Captain Daniel Whitaker's confrontation with Amara in the priority boarding line had been swift and brutal. The viral video, now viewed over 50 million times, had branded HorizonStar as a symbol of arrogance and prejudice, with hashtag like #HorizonStar Scandal and #Racist Pilot dominating social media. Leaked emails from rival airline Skypulse had poured fuel on the fire, revealing internal discussions about cost-cutting measures that prioritized schedule over safety. The stock market had reacted mercilessly, with HorizonStar shares plummeting 30% in the weeks since the incident, costing the company over $200 million in market value. Cancelled flights had stranded thousands, costing millions more in refunds and compensation. The media frenzy was unrelenting, with news outlets running headlines like "Pilot's Prejudice Triggers FAA Crackdown" and *HorizonStar's Safety Crisis. An airline on the brink *. But for Amara, this wasn't about headlines or stock prices. It was about the 180 souls on every flight, the lives entrusted to an airline that had betrayed that trust. Her father's death in a preventable crash 12 years ago had driven her to this moment, and she would not falter now. Davenport cleared his throat, his voice raspy from days of crisis management. "Dr. Brooks, Ms. Vasquez, we take this situation with the utmost seriousness," he began, his words carefully rehearsed. "We've already terminated Captain Whitaker and the maintenance supervisor, Tom Kessler. We're prepared to overhaul our entire safety management system, effective immediately. We're committed to." Amara held up a hand, a simple gesture that silenced the most powerful man in the room. "Termination is a consequence, Mr. Davenport, not a solution," she said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of a gavel. "The problems my team uncovered were not the fault of 2 rogue employees. They were symptoms of a diseased corporate culture, one you and your executive team fostered." She tapped the thick report on the table. "This document details a company that prioritized on-time performance and cost-cutting above all else. You rewarded mechanics for faster turnarounds, not thoroughness. You created schedules that pushed pilots to the edge of legal rest limits and implicitly encouraged them to fudge the numbers. You promoted a man like Daniel Whitaker to senior captain, a man whose arrogance was on display for years because his aggressive approach kept flights moving. You didn't just allow this to happen, you incentivized it." The silence that followed was deafening. The executives shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting to one another, to Davenport, to the report. They were used to deferential consultants and negotiable regulators. Not this a woman who spoke with the authority of truth, her words a mirror reflecting their failures. Elena Vasquez leaned forward, her voice grave. "The findings in this report are among the most serious we've seen from a major carrier in over a decade, she said. Over 200 individual violations, ranging from improperly stowed equipment to falsified hydraulic maintenance, shoddy tire inspections, and chronic crew fatigue. Your safety management system is fundamentally broken. The question is not whether. There will be consequences, but how severe they will be. Davenport's face tightened, his knuckles whitening around his mug. We understand the gravity, he said, his voice strained. We're prepared to cooperate fully, to implement any changes you require, but we need to keep our airline operational. The economic impact of these cancellations is. Amara cut him off again, her eyes narrowing. The economic impact, Mr. Davenport, is a direct result of your airline's choices. You chose to install uncertified parts to save costs. You chose to pressure mechanics to sign off on faulty systems. You chose to let a pilot like Whitaker operate with unchecked arrogance. The lives of your passengers are not a line item on a balance sheet. My team is here to ensure those lives are protected, no matter the cost to your bottom line. The room was a tableau of stunned silence. Jameson Holt, the VP of Operations for DFW, sat to Davenport's right, his face pale, his hands clasped tightly to keep them from shaking. He'd spent the last 3 weeks in a waking nightmare, coordinating with corporate, fielding calls from the media, and watching his career teeter on the edge. The FAA's investigation had exposed his oversight failures. From approving Kessler's maintenance shortcuts to ignoring whistleblower complaints like Carlos Rivera's, he wanted to speak, to offer some defense, but Amara's presence was a force that silenced excuses. The FAA's legal counsel, both seasoned attorneys, began outlining the consequences. HorizonStar Airlines is hereby fined $24.5 million for violations of Title 49 of the United States Code. One said, his voice flat. Additionally, 20% of your fleet is grounded for immediate mandatory inspections under direct FAA supervision. Your DFW maintenance and crew scheduling divisions will operate under a 2-year federal consent decree, with every aspect monitored. You are also required to fund and implement a new safety management and ethics training program, designed and approved by Dr. Brooks' office. The numbers hit like a sledgehammer. $24.5 million was one of the largest fines in recent aviation history, but the consent decree was the real blower public admission of failure, a corporate probation that would cripple HorizonStar's reputation. Davenport leaned forward, desperation creeping into his voice. We'll comply, of course, he said. But can we discuss a timeline? Our passengers, our employees, they're suffering because of this. Amara's expression didn't soften. Your passengers have been suffering because of your negligence. Mr. Davenport, she said, this audit is the remedy, not the problem. My team will remain at DFW until every violation is addressed. You can start by providing full access to your procurement records. We have evidence of uncertified parts being used across your fleet, and we need to know who authorized it. Holt's head snapped up, his eyes wide. The uncertified parts issue, uncovered through Carlos Rivera's whistleblower testimony and Tara Nugent's data analysis, was a ticking bomb. The faulty engine sensor on the grounded Airbus A321 was just one instance. Similar sensors had been installed on at least 5 other aircraft, sourced from a shady supplier to cut costs. The decision had come from higher up, a procurement VP named Patricia Langston, whose emails on Rivera's USB drive showed she'd knowingly approved the substandard parts to meet budget targets. Holt had been copied on some of those emails. a fact he'd hoped would stay buried. "We're investigating that internally," he said, his voice unsteady. "We'll provide whatever you need." "You'll provide it now," Tara Nguyen interjected, her tablet glowing with data. "We've traced the sensor serial numbers to a supplier not on the FAA's approved list. Your procurement logs show Langston signed off on the purchase 6 months ago, despite warnings from your maintenance team." "We have the emails, Mr. Holt. This wasn't an oversight, it was a deliberate choice." Davenport's face went ashen. Langston, sitting 3 seats down, froze, her hands gripping the table. The room felt like it was closing in, the air thick with the weight of accountability. Outside the boardroom, the fallout was spreading like wildfire. The media frenzy had intensified, with news vans camped outside HorizonStar's headquarters, reporters clamoring for statements. The viral video of Whitaker's confrontation with Amara had become a cultural flashpoint, sparking debates about prejudice, privilege, and corporate accountability. Sky Pulse, the rival airline, continued to fan the flames, leaking more internal HorizonStar documents to the press. The latest batch revealed a memo from Davenport himself, urging managers to maximize operational efficiency even if it meant creative compliance with regulations. The phrase was a smoking gun, proof that the culture of negligence started at the top. HorizonStar's stock continued its free fall, and analysts predicted a potential bankruptcy filing if the crisis wasn't contained. Back at DFW, the FAA team was relentless. Tara Nguyen led a group in the maintenance hangar, where mechanics were interviewed under oath, their statements corroborating Carlos Rivera's claims of pressure and intimidation. Sarah Lopez, the young mechanic who'd confessed to signing off on a hydraulic leak, provided detailed testimony about Tom Kessler's orders to keep the planes moving. The FAA's avionics expert, Frank Delgado, had uncovered more discrepancies. A Boeing 737 in the fleet had been flying with a cracked landing gear strut, missed in 3 consecutive inspections. The logs, signed by Kessler, claimed no issues. Noted, Frank's team pulled the diagnostic machine's internal memory, confirming no tests had been run, just as Carlos had warned. Each discovery was another nail in HorizonStar's coffin, evidence of a systemic failure that went beyond one pilot or one plane. Amara, sitting in the boardroom, felt the weight of her father's memory pressing on her. Captain Marcus Brooks had been a stickler for procedure, a pilot who'd taught her that the skies demanded respect, not ego. His crash, caused by a maintenance oversight, had left her with a mission to hold airlines accountable, to ensure no other family endured the pain hers had. Whitaker's arrogance, his dismissal of her in the terminal, was a microcosm of the mindset that had killed her father, a belief that rules were flexible for those with enough authority. She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. "Mr. Davenport," she said, her voice cutting through the room, "your company's culture rewarded shortcuts and silenced dissent. Carlos Rivera, a mechanic, risked his career to provide evidence of falsified logs. Your first officer, Ryan Patel, detailed a cockpit environment where safety was secondary to schedule. These are not isolated incidents, they're symptoms of your leadership." Davenport's eyes flickered with something close to shame, but he rallied. "We're taking steps," he said. "We've suspended all maintenance supervisors involved, and we're auditing our procurement process. We want to make this right." Amara leaned forward, her gaze unyielding. "You don't get to make this right by suspending a few scapegoats," she said. "Your airline flew planes with uncertified parts, falsified logs, and fatigued pilots. You endangered lives. My team will remain until we're satisfied that every aircraft, every procedure, and every employee meets FAA standards. And that starts with accountability at the top. The FAA Legal Counsel outlined the next steps. A mandatory retraining program for all HorizonStar pilots and mechanics, overseen by Amara's office. A complete overhaul of the maintenance division with new leadership, and a public report detailing the violations to be released to the media. The consent decree meant HorizonStar would operate under FAA scrutiny for 2 years, every decision audited, every flight plan reviewed. The financial hit was staggering $24.5 million in fines, millions more in lost revenue from grounded planes, and an estimated $50 million to implement the new safety program. But the reputational damage was worse. Passengers were booking away in droves, choosing competitors like Scoose, whose aggressive PR campaign painted them as the safer choice. HorizonStar's brand, once synonymous with modern travel, was now a cautionary tale. Across town, in a sterile government office, Captain Daniel Whitaker faced his reckoning. The FAA certificate revocation hearing was a formality, but a brutal one. The administrative law judge, a stern man in his 60s, sat behind a desk piled with evidence. The CCTV footage of Whitaker's confrontation with Amara, the falsified logbook entries, the missed tire inspection, the glasses violation, the cockpit voice recorder transcripts, and Ryan Patel's damning testimony. Whitaker sat alone, his union representative having declined to defend him, citing an indefensible case. His lawyer, a weary man hired at the last minute, could do little but sit silently as the judge reviewed the evidence. "Mr. Whitaker," the judge said, peering over his reading glasses, "your actions on July 19, 2026, demonstrated a stunning lack of judgment. You profiled a passenger, ignored a valid boarding pass, and threatened to involve security, all based on personal bias. But the investigation into your record reveals a far more concerning pattern, long-standing disregard for regulations. You falsified rest periods, dismissed engine alerts, failed to wear required corrective lenses, and signed off on a pre-flight inspection that missed a critical tire defect. You believed your seniority placed you above the rules. It did not." The judge paused, letting the words sink in. "This board decides that your air transport pilot license is hereby permanently revoked. You will not be permitted to act as a pilot in command or any capacity as a required flight crew member in United States airspace, effective immediately." The word permanent echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. Whitaker's face was ashen, his hands trembling in his lap. His career, his identity, everything he'd built over 30 years in the cockpit was gone. He was no longer Captain Whitaker, the decorated pilot who commanded respect. He was just Daniel Whitaker, a disgraced man who would never legally fly again. He left the hearing in a daze, the weight of his actions crushing him. The media were waiting outside, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions about the viral video and the FAA's findings. He pushed through them, head down, his silence an admission of defeat. Back at HorizonStar's headquarters, the boardroom meeting stretched into the afternoon. Amara presented the audit's findings in excruciating detail, her voice steady as she outlined each violation. The executives listened in silence, their earlier defensiveness replaced by a resigned look. Patricia Langston, the procurement VP, was called out by name, her emails projected on a screen for all to see. "Ms. Langston," Amara said, "you approved the purchase of uncertified engine sensors, despite warnings from your maintenance team. Your decision endangered lives. We'll be referring this matter to the Department of Justice for further investigation." Langston's face crumpled, her hands covering her mouth. She'd been a rising star, a cost-cutting savant, but now she faced potential criminal charges. Jameson Holt, too, was in the crosshairs. His failure to act on Carlos Rivera's complaints and his oversight of the maintenance division were laid bare. "Mr. Holt," Amara said, "you were copied on emails discussing the use of substandard parts. You signed off on schedules that pushed pilots beyond legal rest limits. Your inaction enabled this crisis." Holt opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. He knew the truth. He'd prioritized his career over safety, and now he was paying the price. Davenport, sensing the room slipping away, tried one last plea. "Dr. Brooks, we're committed to change," he said. "Give us a chance to fix this without destroying the company." Amara's eyes met his, unflinching. "You had years to fix this, Mr. Davenport," she said. "You chose not to. Now, the FAA will ensure it's done right." As the meeting adjourned, the executives filed out, their faces grim. Davenport stayed behind, staring at the report, knowing his tenure as CEO was likely over. The board was already discussing his replacement, and rumors of a merger with a larger competitor were swirling. HorizonStar's brand was toxic, its future uncertain. The FAA team, led by Amara, returned to DFW to continue their work, overseeing inspections and interviewing employees. The grounded fleet was slowly being cleared, but only after rigorous checks that exposed more issuist faulty wiring, worn brakes, outdated training manuals. Each finding was a testament to the depth of HorizonStar's failures, a legacy of arrogance and neglect. For Amara, the weeks that followed were a blur of reports, interviews, and coordination with her team. She didn't gloat or celebrate. This wasn't a victory, but a tragedy that a man's prejudice had been allowed to fester, that a company had prioritized profit over lives. Her thoughts often returned to her father, to the crash that had shaped her life. She carried his pilot's wings in her satchel, a reminder of why she did this work. Every violation uncovered, every plane grounded, was a step toward preventing another family from knowing her pain. But the work was far from over. HorizonStar was just one airline, DFW just one hub. There were others out there, cutting corners, silencing whistleblowers, risking lives, and Amara would find them. 6 months later, in February 2027, Amara stood in the priority boarding line at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, preparing to board a flight for another inspection. Her trench coat was draped over her arm, her satchel at her side, her cornrows neatly styled. The gate agent, a young man with a warm smile, looked up from his screen. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Brooks," he said, his voice genuine. "We're honored to have you fly with us today." Amara returned the smile, a real one this time, tinged with hope. Perhaps, she thought, things were starting to change. One report, one grounded pilot at a time. The skies were quieter now for HorizonStar. The merger with Skypulse was finalized, the HorizonStar name erased from the industry, its planes repainted, its employees absorbed or let go. The $24.5 million fine and the consent decree had crippled the company, and the public report, released by Amara's office, had sealed its fate. Passengers now check airline safety records before booking, and regulators across the industry were on high alert. The ripple effects of the DFW audit were felt nationwide. with other carriers scrambling to review their practices before the FAA came knocking. Daniel Whitaker, now a pariah, lived in obscurity, his phone silent except for occasional calls from reporters he ignored. His wife had left him, unable to bear the shame of his actions, and his former colleagues shunned him, blaming him for the scrutiny that had cost them bonuses and job security. He spent his days watching news reports of the merger, his face a recurring image in stories about corporate failure, the fortress of authority he'd built his uniform. His rank, his swagger had collapsed, brought down by a woman he'd underestimated, a woman whose integrity and competence had exposed him for what he was. Amara, back at O'Hare, boarded her flight, settling into her first-class seat. She opened her tablet, reviewing notes for her next inspection, but her mind lingered on Dallas. The confrontation with Whitaker, the whistleblower's courage, the boardroom showdown, they were all part of a larger fight, one she'd been waging since she was 20, standing at her father's grave. The skies were safer today because of her work, but not safe enough. There were more Whitakers out there, more Davenports, more HorizonStars, and she would find them, one airport at a time. As the plane taxied to the runway, Amara looked out. The window, the Chicago skyline fading into the winter haze. The message of her work was clear, echoing from the tarmac to the boardroom in the skies. There is no room for prejudice or arrogance, only procedure, professionalism, and the unyielding demand for safety. Whitaker's karma wasn't cosmic, it was procedural, the result of a system of checks and balances personified by Amara Brooks. Her story was a reminder that true authority comes not from a uniform or a title, but from integrity and competence, and that those who underestimate it do so at their peril.